I woke up to the sound of chainsaws. Not birds, not the wind rustling through pines like usual, nope, just the unmistakable scream of a two-stroke engine and the crunch of tires on gravel. I pulled on jeans, half asleep, thinking maybe a tree had come down in the storm last night. Then I opened my front door and froze. There were 4 guys in safety vests hacking away at the shrubs along my driveway, and one of them was already hammering in a wooden post. Attached to the post was a bright green sign that read, "Future site of the Pine Loop Community Trail, connecting nature, connecting neighbors." I stood there on the porch, barefoot, trying to figure out if I was still dreaming or if I had, at some point, unknowingly slipped into a parallel universe. Then I saw the kicker. They'd ripped out my grandfather's carved wooden sign that had marked our road for as long as I could remember. You know the kind, weathered cedar, hand-chiseled letters, varnished every spring. It used to say, "Greer's Hollow, private way." It wasn't just decorative. That thing had history. That sign was my grandfather, stubborn old Vietnam vet that he was. He'd put it up himself in '87 after buying the land from the Forest Service, and he told every delivery driver, Jehovah's Witness, and nosy neighbor who tried to argue with him the same thing. It's private. That's the sign. Keep moving. And now, it was gone. Tossed aside in the weeds like garbage. I stepped off the porch and walked right up to the nearest guy who looked at me like I was interrupting his morning. I asked what the hell they were doing. "Trail improvement," he said, with the kind of shrug you give when you're used to not being questioned. "On my land?" I asked. He blinked. "Aren't you with the HOA?" "No," I said. "I'm the guy who owns this property. You're standing on my private road." He gave me this awkward smile, like I'd just told a bad joke. "I was told this stretch was part of the Greenway expansion. The HOA said it was approved." Of course they did. I made him stop immediately and told the others to pack up before I called the sheriff. They grumbled, but they left. And I just stood there for a while, staring at the stump where my grandfather's sign used to be, wondering how the hell we got here. First, I moved back out here 2 years ago, after my marriage fell apart and the city burned me out. I'd been living in Asheville, making a decent living as a freelance cartographer. Yeah, that's still a thing. Doing historical overlays, trail mapping for national parks, that kind of stuff. The work was good, but the noise, the traffic, the constant buzz of 1,000 people who all needed to be somewhere yesterday, it finally wore me down. So when my grandfather passed and left me his 6-acre property just outside Pine Loop, I packed my stuff, sublet my apartment, and moved into the old cabin nestled in the pines. It wasn't much by modern standards, 2 bedrooms, wood stove, a roof that needed more patchwork than I'd care to admit, but it was quiet. Secluded. Mine. The driveway itself was a 1/4-mile ribbon of gravel that twisted through the trees like it had grown there. That road wasn't just a way in, it was the line, the boundary, the symbol of everything my grandfather built with his bare hands and stubbornness. He was a man who didn't believe in HOAs, handouts, or heated arguments unless bourbon was involved. And when he bought this land back in the '80s, he made sure, explicitly sure, that it fell outside the new development being planned next door. Said he wasn't about to live under the rule of a bunch of retirees with clipboards and god complexes. Can't say I blamed him, and I certainly didn't plan on joining either. So when I moved in, I restored the mailbox, painted the trim, and rehung the sign. Greer's Hollow, private way. It felt like closing a loop, like this forgotten little road had waited all this time to welcome me home. Now, here we are. HOA trucks. On my gravel, a bright green sign declaring my driveway their next hiking trail, and no one, not one damn person, had asked. I hadn't even gotten to my coffee yet. Couple days after the chainsaw incident, I got a letter in the mail. No envelope, just a folded piece of printer paper taped shut like a kid's lunch note. It was stuck inside my gate, right where my sign used to hang before they yanked it out. On the front, in curling blue ballpoint, was written, "To Mr. Greer, Community Opportunity." So right away, I knew it wasn't going to be good. Inside was this 2-page invitation from the Pine Loop Preserve HOA. Real polite, real smarmy. It started off with the usual neighborhood fluff, shared values, natural harmony, progressive vision. Then it got to the point. "We believe the integration of your private access road into the Pine Loop Community Trail System would benefit all residents by promoting walkability, environmental stewardship, and community togetherness." It went on to say they'd already approved Phase 1 of the trail, which apparently included my entire driveway, and that they hoped I'd embrace this shared future by waiving any property restrictions and joining the HOA in an honorary capacity. Honorary, like it was some kind of club. At the bottom, in crisp signature font type, was the name Carol Whitmore, HOA President. I hadn't met her yet, but I'd heard the name. She was the one who'd recently made headlines on the Nextdoor app for fining a guy $250 for painting his porch unapproved taupe. Apparently, taupe is a gateway color. I almost laughed, but the last paragraph cut that short. If we don't hear from you by Friday, we will assume your full cooperation and proceed accordingly. They were just gonna assume. Like silence meant yes. Like this was their land, and I was just the guy lucky enough to be living on it rent-free. I took a walk down the road after that. My road still had tire marks from their truck. The ruts in the gravel were fresh, and a few candy wrappers had blown into the grass near the edge of the pines. That was the moment it clicked for me. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a miscommunication or some clipboard error. This was a test. They were poking the fence to see if the dog barked. Well, newsflash, this dog has teeth. So I wrote Carol back. Handwritten, just like hers, but without the smiley tone. Told her in no uncertain terms that the land was private, the road was private, and that any further activity on my property without permission would be considered trespassing. I signed it Lucas Greer, owner. Then I drove into town and hand-delivered it to the HOA office, just to make sure it couldn't mysteriously get lost in the mail. The woman at the front desk, sweet, overly lip-glossed, probably 22, read it, blinked twice, and then said, "Oh, Carol's not here right now, but I'll, totally give this to her." I told her to make sure she did, and I meant it. But that was just the opening move. I could already feel it. Carol wasn't going to back off just because I said no. People like her don't hear no, not from people like me. I figured that letter would be the end of it, that I'd drawn a clear line in the sand and Carol Whitmore would move on to harassing someone whose shutters were an inch too wide or who planted petunias instead of hydrangeas. I was wrong. About a week later, I came back from the grocery store to find a white city truck parked near the mouth of my driveway. Two guys in reflective vests were standing next to a stack of survey markers and a tripod-mounted scope, waving their arms like they were arguing over coordinates. I parked, got out, and asked what they were doing. "Property line verification," one of them said, barely glancing up. HOA submitted a request to confirm easement access for trail development. I blinked. What easement? They looked at each other, then back at me like I was the slow one. "We were told the community has an easement through here. You'll need to talk to your HOA rep." I'm not in the HOA. That got me a pause. One of them pulled a clipboard from the truck and started flipping through paperwork. It says here that this area falls under Pine Loop Community Access Overlay, Phase 1 approval dated last month. Carol Whitmore submitted the documentation. I just stood there staring at them while they marked up the edge of my driveway with pink flags like they were laying out the welcome mat for hikers. Then, because fate has a sense of humor, I looked up and noticed something new nailed to one of my pine trees. A laminated sheet with the HOA logo and big friendly letters, "Future trail access. Please respect our progress." My hands clenched so hard I thought I'd snap my car keys in half. That sign wasn't there when I left that morning. Someone had come onto my property, again, nailed a sign to my tree, and then left like they were doing me a favor. I tore the sign down and tossed it in the bed of my truck. Then I called the county records office because I needed to know if I'd somehow missed something in the deed. Some weird clause or forgotten handshake deal from 100 years ago. The woman on the phone was polite but clearly stressed. "We've had a lot of calls about Pine Loop lately," she said. "You're not the only one." She confirmed there were no easements filed on my land. Nothing public, nothing private. The road was mine. Always had been. Still was. So Carol's claim? Total fabrication. But she wasn't done. A few days after the survey, guys, I got another note taped to my gate. This time, it was from the HOA's Landscape Standards Committee. It said the vegetation along my road was overgrown and inconsistent with the visual harmony of Pine Loop's natural aesthetic. They offered to assist with trimming and replanting to match HOA guidelines. They wanted to redecorate my woods. Next thing I knew, two of my neighbors, whom I'd never spoken more than 5 words to, showed up while I was working on my porch rail and started asking real casual questions. "So, when you inherited the property, did it come with, full water rights? Is the cabin insulated? Looks kinda rustic. Ever think about building a second structure? Could be real profitable with tourists?" It didn't take a genius to figure out where that was coming from. And then came the kicker. One evening, I opened my mailbox and found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single-page flyer from the HOA's spring newsletter, though clearly meant just for me. It read, "Exciting plans are underway to transform Greer's Hollow Road into a vibrant walking trail connecting our community with the natural beauty we all cherish." They even included a little map mock-up, complete with cute benches, trash cans, and one of those interpretive trail signs labeled Historic Greer's Way, established 1987. Historic. Like they were already writing me out of the picture. They were trying to turn my road, my woods, my home into a public park without my consent, and painting it like I should be flattered. But the real blow came the next morning. I walked out and saw that someone had spray painted over my grandfather's mailbox, the old metal one he'd bolted into a cedar stump when I was a kid. It had G. Greer stamped on the side with brass lettering. I used to trace those letters with my finger when I was little, waiting for him to come home from the ranger station. The letters were gone, covered in slashes of neon orange graffiti. Open access equals progress. That mailbox wasn't just a mailbox. That was my grandfather's last project before he died. I'd sanded it down and repainted it when I moved in. It meant something. Now it was vandalized. I remember just standing there, breathing through my nose, while my coffee went cold in my hand. That's when it changed. That's when it stopped being about paperwork and signs and neighbors who wanted a nicer place to walk their dogs. That's when it got personal. And I realized something about Carol Whitmore. She didn't just want a trail, she wanted control, and she'd keep pushing until someone pushed back harder. I figured I'd try doing things the so-called right way first. My grandfather always said, give him a chance to do the decent thing, then hit him with both barrels if they don't. So I took his advice. Step 1 was legal. I called up a local attorney, a guy named Brian Haddock, mid-50s, wore bolo ties unironically, had a law office in a converted barn and a waiting room that smelled like pipe tobacco and lemon furniture polish. My kind of place. Brian looked over the deed, the parcel maps, the old survey my grandfather filed in '89. He even whistled when he saw the federal land grant paperwork. You've got a fortress here, legally speaking, he said. They've got no jurisdiction. You're not part of the HOA, no recorded easement, no public access, not even a maintenance right-of-way. So what's with the flags, the signage, the trail newsletter, I asked. He leaned back in his cracked leather chair. Sounds like they're bluffing and hoping you cave. Classic HOA intimidation play. If they can convince the public it's already decided, most folks won't question it. Great. So we drafted a formal cease and desist, sent it certified mail to Carol Whitmore and the HOA board. Brian also filed a notice of trespass with the county clerk, which apparently carries some weight if this escalated into legal action. It felt like progress. That was a Monday. By Wednesday, I got a reply. Not from Carol, of course. No, she sent her lapdog, a man named Preston McKee. HOA, legal liaison, whatever that means. His email was about 3 paragraphs of condescension wrapped in passive-aggressive politeness. Said something like, while we acknowledge Mr. Greer's concerns, it's important to note that our efforts are purely in the interest of community enrichment. As previously stated, the HOA has proceeded under the belief that the trail segment falls within the spirit, if not the letter, of shared neighborhood development goals. The spirit of it. That line nearly made me snap my laptop in half. But I didn't, because I was still trying. I responded, civil, firm, no sarcasm, which took effort, and reiterated that the road was private, the land was private, and that there was zero legal or moral basis for what they were doing. You know what I got back? Silence. For 3 days. Then the next community newsletter went out. They slipped copies into mailboxes and laminated a few onto neighborhood bulletin boards like it was some kind of inspirational scripture. It included a 2-page spread about the upcoming community trail launch, with my driveway right there in the graphic, now labeled Greer Greenway. Greer Greenway. They literally renamed my road, without permission, without so much as a knock on my damn door. And tucked neatly in the margins was a quote from an anonymous board member that read, "Change can be uncomfortable for some, but progress always finds a way forward." Yeah, well, some was me, and progress was apparently bulldozing everything my grandfather built. I tried one last time, because despite everything, I wanted to believe they'd stop before this turned into a war. I requested a meeting, in person, no lawyers, no letters, just a sit-down with Carol Whitmore herself. To my surprise, she agreed. We met at the HOA Clubhouse, a big colonial-style building they built to look like it belonged in a magazine ad for backyard flagstone patios. When I arrived, Carol was already seated at the conference table, sipping something out of a travel mug with "Number Boss Lady" printed on it. She greeted me with a tight smile like we were old friends who'd had a little disagreement about who gets the last slice of pie, not a full-blown property dispute. "Lucas," she said, like she'd known me forever, "thanks for coming." I sat across from her. "Let's make this quick." She gave a practiced chuckle. "Of course, I understand you're upset, but you should know, this really isn't personal." Kind of feels personal when you rename my driveway." She waved that off like I'd commented on the weather. That was just marketing language. It's aspirational. I stared at her. "Number? It's fiction." She leaned forward. "Lucas, I understand you're attached to your grandfather's land. Really, I do. But this trail project is already in motion. It's been approved by the board. There's grant money involved. You'd be doing something truly meaningful by joining the community effort, and if I'm being honest, if you play ball, there could be incentives, tax benefits, a legacy plaque, your name on a bench." I nearly choked. "A bench? You want to name a bench after me in exchange for my driveway?" She gave me that look people use when they think they're being generous and you're just too stupid to get it. "You're holding up something that benefits hundreds of people, Lucas. It's one gravel road. You don't even use it that much." That's when I knew. She wasn't going to stop, not because she believed in trails or greenways or whatever branding nonsense they were using, but because she wanted to prove she could take something that wasn't hers and make it theirs. Control. That's all this was ever about. So I stood up, tucked my chair back in, and said, "Appreciate your time." She smiled like she'd won, but in my gut I could already feel the switch flip. The patience had run its course. They'd had their chance to do the decent thing. Now it was time to hit back. It was the mailbox that did it. After that meeting with Carol, the fake smile, the bench offer, the way she kept calling my grandfather's road underutilized infrastructure, I came home with a headache and a rage I couldn't shake. I stood out by the cedar stump where the mailbox used to be and just stared at it, like somehow I could will it back to how it was. Instead, all I saw was the scorched spray paint stain on the side and the faint ghost of the brass letters that once spelled G. Greer. I don't know what made me do it exactly. Maybe instinct, maybe just needing a reason not to throw something heavy through Carol's clubhouse window, but I went inside, pulled down my grandfather's old metal filing box from the closet, and started digging. Now, you gotta understand, the man was obsessive about documentation. He kept manuals for appliances he no longer owned. He had receipts for hardware store purchases from 1992, and tucked between a rusted tin of roofing nails and a weathered topo map was an envelope marked in pencil, "Do not file, for Lucas if Pine Loop ever comes knocking." I just sat there for a second. Then I opened it. Inside was a typed letter, signed and notarized, dated back to 2003, 20 years ago. It was addressed to the county records office, and it explained in no uncertain terms that my grandfather, George Greer, was formally asserting exclusive ownership of the private access road on his property, down to the exact GPS coordinates. He'd included photos, annotated maps, and copies of the original land transfer documents from the Bureau of Land Management, who'd awarded the land to him in the early 80s as part of a veteran rehabilitation land grant program. What I hadn't known, what no one in Pine Loop knew, was that the land wasn't just a private parcel. It was federally protected, as in, my grandfather's land had been granted under a special clause that ensured it could not be annexed, rezoned, or used for public access of any kind without written consent from the owner or their legal heir, which would be me. I kept reading, flipping through document after document, my heart racing faster with every page. There was a map from 1984 showing the original development boundary lines of Pine Loop, and right there in black and white, my grandfather's land clearly carved out, excluded from any municipal jurisdiction. It even had a note scribbled in the margin in his blocky handwriting. "They'll try. Stand your ground." But here's where things got really interesting. Tucked in the back of the envelope was a second, much older letter. This one was from the County Engineering Department, dated 1991. It confirmed that the runoff drainage system used for the eastern side of Pine Loop, the one they still used, fed directly into a natural gully that cut through the lower edge of our property. And it wasn't just mentioned in passing. The letter was practically begging my grandfather to sign an agreement formalizing the drainage use. He never did, which means for the past 30 years, the HOA had been illegally funneling stormwater onto our land, quietly, without documentation, without maintenance, without permission. And suddenly, I understood everything. Carol didn't just want a trail, she wanted a paper trail. If she could get me to agree to turn my driveway into public access, she'd have retroactive justification for all the undocumented drainage infrastructure they'd run across the property, pipes, culverts, runoff trenches, without my grandfather's approval. She wasn't just trying to build a walking path, she was trying to cover their tracks. Because if anyone found out they'd been dumping stormwater through protected land, especially land under a federal veterans grant, they'd be facing a massive liability nightmare. I stared at that engineering letter like it was a live grenade. This wasn't just about property lines anymore. This was fraud. This was environmental code violation. This was possibly a federal crime. and Carol Whitmore had just picked a fight with the one guy who had all the receipts. Literally. I sat back in my chair, my heart still hammering, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled. They thought they were laying trail markers. What they were really doing was laying the foundation for their own downfall, and I had the map. I didn't sleep much that night. I laid in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking through every angle, every move, every stupid laminated sign they'd nailed to my trees like they owned the place. But this time I wasn't angry. I was focused, because now I knew exactly what they were hiding, and I had the documentation to prove it, which meant I had leverage, and not the kind you wave around in a courtroom hoping a judge sees it your way. I had the kind that gets people fired, investigated, audited, the kind that makes HOA presidents lie awake at night wondering if the paper trail they left behind is enough to keep them out of jail. So I got to work. First, I scanned everything, every document, every map, every letter. I backed them up to 3 separate hard drives in a secure cloud folder, because if Carol somehow got wind that I had this stuff, I wouldn't put it past her to accidentally file a complaint about my house being an unpermitted fire hazard. Next, I called Brian, my lawyer with the bolo ties, and laid it all out. Drainage? He repeated when I told him about the runoff. On federally protected land? Yep. And they never filed an easement? Nope. He let out a long whistle. That's a whole different ballgame, Lucas. We're talking Clean Water Act violations, land use fraud, possibly even mail fraud, depending on how they've been collecting fees tied to that illegal infrastructure. Can we go public with this? I asked. Oh, you can. The real question is, how hard do you want to hit them? I thought about it for a second. Hard enough they don't forget it. So we made a plan. Phase 1. Establish a legal chokehold. Brian drafted a formal notice of violation to the HOA citing unauthorized water diversion and trespassing on federally protected land. We also attached a demand for full accounting of any community funds used to support the trail initiative, and a public statement rescinding all future plans involving Greer's Hollow. The best part? We didn't send it directly to Carol. We sent it to the County Environmental Compliance Officer and CC'd the State Department of Environmental Quality. Let her find that out secondhand. Phase 2, community exposure. Now, I'm not a flashy guy. I don't care about local gossip, and I sure as hell never thought I'd be the guy uploading maps to Facebook groups. But desperate times, right? I posted a full write-up with annotated maps and photos to the Pine Loop Neighborhood Forum under the title, What's Really Under the Trail? The part the HOA didn't want you to see. It got shared 63 times in the first 3 hours. I didn't even know 63 people read that forum. Turns out, a lot of my neighbors weren't thrilled to find out the HOA had been rerouting stormwater through my land for years without telling anyone, especially not the folks living downstream. One guy, Doug something, commented, "My backyard floods every damn spring. Now I know why. Carol's got some explaining to do." Phase 3. Put boots on the ground. I contacted a couple of local environmental reporters, ones who specialized in zoning battles and small-town corruption stories, the kind who live for this sort of David versus Goliath drama. One of them called me back within an hour, and by the end of the week, she'd scheduled a visit to walk the property with me. We took pictures of the drainage pipes, the spray-painted mailbox, even the signposts the HOA had quietly hammered in along my tree line. She interviewed me right there in the woods with a portable mic clipped to my flannel shirt. "You planning to sue?" she asked. "Only if they're stupid enough to keep pushing." She laughed. "This'll get traction." "Oh, I know," I said. "It's already got roots." Phase 4, set the stage. I went to the hardware store and bought a new signpost, solid oak. I carved the lettering by hand over 2 evenings, just like my grandfather used to. Then I put it back up at the start of the driveway. Greer's Hollow, private way, protected land, no public access. Below that, I hung a smaller plaque. Unauthorized entry may constitute a federal violation. This land is not governed by Pine Loop HOA. I wasn't bluffing anymore, and I wasn't playing defense. I was inviting them to make their next move, knowing full well that this time it would be their last. I didn't have to wait long. 3 days after the environmental notice went out, Carol finally broke her silence, with the grace of a raccoon caught in a trash can. I was out front splitting firewood when a black Lexus SUV rolled up my driveway like it owned the place. Carol stepped out wearing a cream pantsuit that looked like it had never seen actual dirt, let alone a pine forest. She had sunglasses on, a clipboard in hand, and the smile of a woman who just realized the dinner party she planned is on fire and someone replaced the wine with gasoline. "Lucas," she said, tight-lipped, "we need to talk." I set the axe down and dusted off my hands. "No thanks. I like talking to people who respect property lines." She forced a laugh like we were two sitcom characters bantering before the credits rolled. I've been made aware of the misunderstanding involving the trail. I think if we can just clear the air, there's no reason to escalate things unnecessarily. Pretty sure you already escalated when you bulldozed my shrubs and renamed my driveway. That wiped the smile off her face. She shifted gears fast. Look, I'm here as a representative of Pine Loop. The board is very concerned about the messaging you've put online. Some of it is inaccurate and, quite frankly, inflammatory. Oh, you mean the part where you've been illegally diverting water runoff onto protected land for 30 years? Or the part where you forged maps, pushed trail plans without consent, and held secret votes that included property you don't even own? She opened her mouth, closed it again. I stepped closer. I gave you a chance, Carol. You ignored legal notices, you blew off my attorney, you lied to the board, to the neighbors, to the county, and now you're here pretending this is all just a little PR hiccup? You came onto my land without permission, multiple times, and now that the feds are sniffing around, you want to play nice? Her jaw clenched. There are ways to settle this quietly. I smiled. Too late for quiet. Because, see, I wasn't just relying on legal pressure and angry forum posts. I'd been working behind the scenes with a few allies. Turns out, the HOA board wasn't as united as Carol liked to pretend. There was one guy, Marvin, who always sat silently during meetings, retired history teacher, had a parrot named Socrates, walked around the neighborhood with socks in his sandals. Total wild card. But Marvin had a soft spot for land rights and a big problem with how Carol steamrolled dissent. He reached out to me after seeing the drainage documents online and asked if I wanted help organizing a special session. HOA bylaws allowed any 5 homeowners to request one, and Marvin got 10. That meeting happened on a rainy Thursday night in the community clubhouse. I showed up early, brought a USB stick full of scanned documents, printed handouts for the board, and a poster-sized map of the property with all the violations highlighted in red. And this time, I brought backup. Brian, my bolo tie lawyer, sat beside me at the table, looking like he'd stepped out of a Clint Eastwood movie. The environmental reporter sat in the back taking notes, and I'd invited 2 neighbors, Doug, with the flooded yard, and Sarah, whose backyard garden had been affected by the runoff, to speak. When Carol entered, flanked by her usual yes-men, she looked rattled. The room wasn't her room anymore. I walked everyone through the full timeline. I showed the land grant, the federal protection clause, the drainage letter, the forged newsletter. I played an audio recording of my meeting with Carol. She didn't know I'd hit record on my phone when she offered to name a bench after me. Her face went pale. Then came the best part. Marvin stood up and said, I move to remove Carol Whitmore from her position as HOA president effective immediately, pending full investigation. A murmur spread through the room like a ripple in still water. 4 hands shot up immediately, and then 2 more, then a 7th. Majority vote. Carol stood there frozen, clutching her clipboard like a life raft. You can't do this, she snapped. You don't know what you're risking. I looked at her. No, Carol, you didn't know what you were risking. You picked the wrong guy to push. That meeting made it onto the local news site the next morning. Headline, Trail of Trouble, HOA President Ousted. Amid land dispute and federal violations. The article included a photo of me next to my new sign, arms crossed, and Marvin petting his parrot. Carol tried damage control the next day, sent out a personal statement to the neighborhood accusing me of grandstanding and sabotaging a legacy project. Didn't work. People started talking, really talking, about the fees, the hidden agendas, the way Carol strong-armed decisions for years. Doug started a petition to audit the HOA's finances. Sarah ran for interim president. And I? I sat on my porch, drank my coffee, and watched Carol's Lexus drive by slow, like maybe she thought if she looked hard enough, she'd still see a trail where there was only a road. My road, still private, still protected, and now, finally, respected. It was wild how fast things unraveled once the silence broke. 1 minute, I was just the guy with a gravel road and a mailbox full of laminated threats. The next, I was the guy being interviewed on the local radio station between segments about deer crossings and high school softball scores. The host introduced me like I was some kind of rural whistleblower. Lucas Greer joins us today, local property owner who exposed serious misconduct by the Pine Loop HOA. Lucas, welcome. All I could do was laugh. Thanks, though I didn't really expose anything, I just opened a filing box and read. The segment went semi-viral, at least by small-town standards. They posted it on the station's Facebook page, and it racked up over 300 comments in 2 days. Most of them were people tagging neighbors or writing stuff like, I knew Carol was shady. This is why I never joined the HOA. That Greer guy should run for something. I wasn't planning to run for anything unless it was a power line from my shed to the new solar panel I'd been meaning to install. But it kept snowballing. The Environmental Reporter's article finally went live, and it wasn't buried in some paywalled corner of the internet. It was on the front page of the regional paper. Drainage, deception, and the fight for Greer's Hollow. It had everything. A drone shot of my property, with permission. Diagrams showing how runoff from Pine Loop funneled illegally into my land. A pull quote from the 1991 county letter, and a lovely sidebar titled, "What is a federal land grant? And why the HOA screwed up." The journalist didn't pull punches. She quoted me directly, especially the part where I said, "I'm not against community, I'm against being steamrolled in the name of one." Best part? The article included a short interview with Marvin. He told the paper Carol thought she ran Pine Loop. Turns out she couldn't even read a property map. By Saturday, the HOA's shiny bulletin board at the Clubhouse had been stripped of every trail-related flyer and replaced with a typed memo. Effective immediately, all plans for the Greer Greenway initiative are terminated. Then came the emergency newsletter, the one printed in black and white on the HOA's cheapest paper stock, like they were rationing toner. It was 4 pages long and read like a confession someone wrote under duress. It acknowledged that the trail plans were not legally reviewed. The Greer property was never under HOA jurisdiction. The environmental violations were under investigation. And Carol Whitmore had resigned to focus on personal matters. Translation, she was booted, hard, and nobody wanted to say her name anymore in case it conjured her back like Beetlejuice. Neighbors I'd never even spoken to started waving when they drove by. One guy, Jim, he lived 3 lots down and once yelled at me because my wood smoke smelled too wild, actually came up my driveway to say, "Hey, good on you, man. Took some guts." I nearly asked if he was feeling okay. Then, the cherry on top, the county issued an official press release stating they were reviewing all HOA drainage infrastructure in the Pine Loop area due to long-standing compliance concerns. They even used the phrase unauthorized hydrological alterations, which is government speak for you messed up, and we're about to make it expensive. Carol's house went on the market 2 weeks later. No for sale sign. Just a quiet online listing, price dropped 3 times in 4 days. Last I heard, she and her husband moved into a townhouse 2 counties over where the HOA's only rule is don't feed the raccoons. The Pine Loop Board reorganized. Marvin became interim president. Sarah took over communications. They introduced new bylaws requiring full transparency on all future projects, including mandatory disclosure of all land jurisdiction boundaries with notarized owner approval. No more interpretive mapping. Nonsense. And they renamed the trail initiative too. Not after me, thank God. That would have been unbearable. They called it the Loop Walk Project, and they made damn sure it started and ended within HOA property lines. As for me, I replaced the old mailbox, repainted it the same shade of forest green my grandfather always used, even though the hardware store tried to sell me something called spruce shimmer. I mounted the brass letters back on carefully, one at a time. G. Greer. Not because I wanted to erase what happened, but because I wanted it to stay remembered the right way. Not as a battleground, but as the line that didn't move, and that everybody finally learned not to cross. It's been about 6 months since the last HOA flyer darkened my mailbox. Funny how quiet things got once people realized the road wasn't up for negotiation. No more survey crews, no more neon trail signs stapled to my trees, no more unsolicited community opportunity envelopes with Carol's bubbly signature printed like she was inviting me to a Tupperware party instead of hijacking my land. Now it's just birds in the morning, crickets at night, and the occasional squirrel who thinks the porch railing is his personal highway. The road's still mine, still gravel, still winding through the trees exactly like it did when my grandfather carved it out with a rented backhoe and a stubborn will. I put the old Greer's Hollow, private way sign back up, gave it a fresh coat of varnish, planted some native ferns around the post. Feels like it belongs again. A few weeks ago, Marvin stopped by with a mason jar full of homemade blackberry jam and a typed letter on new HOA stationery, less logos, more actual honesty. He said they'd implemented a full transparency policy and were now publicly posting budget breakdowns, meeting notes, and proposed initiatives for member votes. He also added with a smile, trail proposals now come with a mandatory clause. Have we asked the landowner? Progress, I guess. Even Sarah, who once backed Carol before she realized the truth, sent me a note thanking me for reminding the board that good intentions don't cancel bad behavior. I keep it pinned to the corkboard next to my grandfather's original land grant. A reminder that standing your ground doesn't always mean yelling louder. Sometimes it just means staying rooted long enough for people to realize you were right all along. The cabin's holding up pretty well. I've been doing slow upgrades, sealed the roof, rebuilt the porch steps, put in a rain catchment system my grandfather would have called fancy hippie plumbing before secretly admiring it. The funny thing? Every now and then someone asks if I'd consider opening a portion of the land for actual community use, on my terms. I haven't ruled it out. There's a clearing behind the ridge that might make a good spot for a few picnic tables. I've thought about hosting a nature walk or two, maybe even partnering with the local school to teach kids about land stewardship. Real stewardship, not the HOA brand. But if I do, it'll be because I said yes, not because someone forged a map and handed out brochures before knocking on my door. This place, these trees, this road, this land, it was never about keeping people out. It was about keeping the right to choose who comes in. And now, that right's solid, etched in history, backed by law, written in ink, not HOA wishful thinking. So yeah, things are calm now. No bulldozers, no petitions, no bureaucrats trying to turn my woods into a photo op. Just me, a hot cup of coffee, and the same gravel crunch under my boots that's been there since I was a kid riding shotgun with my grandfather in his rusted pickup. Sometimes, I stop at the start of the driveway, lean against the mailbox, and just watch the wind move through the pines. It's quiet. And that quiet, I earned it.